black, they had no vote and could not marry white people. The policy of segregation meant that blacks had to have their own schools, their own churches, their own football teams, even their own cemeteries. Okay, and of course, famously having to sit at the back of buses, not being able to sit next to white people on the bus, separate toilets, everything, every public space was segregated in that way. Of course, in the novel, Scout and Jem get into trouble in Alexandria for attending the black church, which is just one indication of the segregation there, even on religious lines. The blacks file into the courthouse after the whites at the Tom Robinson trial and have to sit separately in the balcony away from the white community. Just coming back to the Ku Klux Klan here, they were a vigilante group. They would try to intimidate and they would even murder black people right up until the 50s, at which point it started to fade out, obviously. And there was a lot of conflict with the black rights community between them and the Ku Klux Klan. Harper Lee may well have based her novel in part on a case in Scottsboro, Alabama. Now, a bit of detail here. 1931, when she was 5, 9 young black men were accused of raping 2 white women on a train. Now, it turned out that they'd been lying, but after a series of bitter trials, 4 of the men got long prison sentences, even though prominent lawyers argued that the accusations were false. So very much like the false accusations against Tom Robinson, that this Scottsboro trial was a real case that Harper Lee had experience of, although she was very young at the time. Now this, just in the top left here, this is a very grim, confronting image of the lynchings that did take place at this time of innocent white people. Now this video will just give you a bit more detail on, in particular, what were known as the Jim Crow laws, which were based on this grotesque caricature of the black man at that time in the 30s, and the enforced segregation and division within the community. Okay.
4 million Americans.
Listen, all you gals and boys, I'm just from Tuckahoe. I'm going to sing a little song. My name's Jim Crow. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. I went down to the river.
In 1836, Jim Crow is born. He begins his strange career as a malicious minstrel caricature of a black man, created by a white man to amuse white audiences. Jim Crow would come to symbolize one of the most tragic eras of race relations in American history, a time deeply rooted in promise and contradiction. 1865, 4 million Americans, slaves simply because they were born black, were now free. But in little over a decade, that promise was gone, replaced by a rigid system of laws designed to keep blacks from experiencing any of their newly achieved rights. It would be known as the era of Jim Crow, the American form of racial apartheid.
But I tried to lean inside and get me a cup of water. And those white people beat me till I was unconscious. They thought I was dead.
My dad said, as long as you're living in this South, you're going to have to go to the back door in this town. And you just settle for that. He said, but one thing I want you to swear and promise to me, that you will never get used to it.
I'm not ashamed of the segregated and Jim Crow experience, all because we were able to devise techniques for survival that permitted us to abide our time and to wait until our change come.
As most blacks were willing to bide their time, some began to fight back. In the late 1880s and 90s, they embarked on an uncertain campaign to secure voting rights, build their own communities, schools, businesses, and churches, and to demand redress against mob violence and lynching. The white supremacists fought back. By 1919, the Ku Klux Klan, which had been a Southern idiosyncrasy, became a national ideology. White supremacy, the power behind Jim Crow, appeared invincible. And over the next decade, the violence against blacks would grow even more horrific. But black Americans continued to battle, using the power of the press and ultimately the power of the courts to pursue their quest for freedom and equality against racism. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is their story, the story of strong men and women who would never accept the demeaning, threatening, and perilous world of Jim Crow. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is the story of those who, in the face of unending terror, achieved triumphs. Triumphs that would in time make America a better place, not just for themselves, but for all of us.
Okay, so it gives you a sense there of the suffering and the segregation in the community in the 1930s. The campaigning obviously took place mainly in the 50s, towards the end of the 50s and into the 60s, led of course by Martin Luther King Jr., famously with his I Have Dreams speech, and the Freedom Riders, of course, the campaigners who would ride on the buses illegally and were often attacked for that, in order to really just to show the ridiculous nature of the laws that they suffered under that split up people completely unnecessarily based on these judgments about colour. Okay, so that's the context of the novel. So when you can, you should try to link the novel to some of those contextual factors, the depression or the novelist, or the social hierarchy, or of course the racist attitudes. Just a few of the main themes. Obviously for German Scout, growing up, education, childhood, parenting, you could be asked any question like this about the novel, about how they mature and how their understanding of the world around them develops. Also, of course, their literal experiences of education in the classroom, but think about Atticus and various parents in the novel, the people that influence either positive or negative role models, particularly for Scout and Jem. Prejudice, essentially a battle between good and evil here. There are, of course, attitudes, white people in the cast of characters who do not have negative attitudes, who are anti-racist. Obviously, the children, obviously Atticus and Miss Maudie, and Linkdees, and some who are a mixture, like Alexandra and Mr. Underwood, and of course obviously some extreme cases of prejudice, typified by Bob Ewell, who's the worst of the worst. Courage. Of course, Atticus tries to teach his children about what true courage is. It's not holding a gun, it's not shooting a dog from 50 yards. It's more like Mrs. DeBose and her bravery in overcoming her addiction. It's knowing that you're beaten and still persisting. And of course, Boo there is an example of courage, getting out of his comfort zone and saving the children, being the hero at the climax of the novel. Mrs. DeBose there, Atticus with the gun, shooting a rabid dog, and Boo. The Mockingbird motif. This means a recurring reference, a recurring image in the novel. It comes up in Mr. Underwood's editorial condemning the verdict, but it also comes up. Atticus and Miss Maudie say, you should never shoot a mockingbird. All they do is sing. They only provide us with peaceful kind of entertainment. They are harmless creatures. Obviously, the key mockingbirds in the novel, in terms of the mockingbird as a symbol, are Tom, he's innocent and he's killed, and Boo, who's punished and enclosed and imprisoned unfairly, of course. They're both innocent. They both suffer unnecessarily at the hands of others. Okay. That's our conclusion. Just to show you the overview here. So hopefully that's helped you. Just to recap on the plot, the key characters, the themes, and context.